Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And I don't know if you've heard, but Britpop is back. Yeah, that legendary 90s musical movement, pretty much based in the UK, that led to classic records from bands such as Oasis, Blur, and the like. Yeah, it's back now. It's really popular. In fact, so popular, we have a great feature piece about the revival of Britpop itself over at theneedledrop.com, which was penned by music writer Victoria Burlando. And the piece is so good that I decided that I wanted to actually pick Victoria's brain about this revival and why exactly it's reviving right now to begin with. So let's do exactly that. Bam. To start this conversation off, I figure it would make sense to kind of just like initiate people a little bit who are maybe Britpop curious here, but maybe not Britpop educated, and just like kind of ask you off the bat, to you, what exactly is Britpop? Is it a sound, a style, an era, a little bit of all of those? Like, kind of lay out the boundaries for us here for this, genre.
Yeah, that is a great question. Because it's one of those styles of music that I think it has a very complex relationship in the way that it's been covered throughout the years.
Mm.
I see Britpop as a specific movement. I see that it's very confined within those 10 years of 1990 to, I'd say about, yeah, 1999, 1998. It's I would say confined to the British Isles. I would say mostly predominantly from England, even though I'm sure that there are some people within England, within the bands that come from the north who are descendants from Scotland and Wales and England. Like, I'm sure that there are people like that. I would not say Ireland is in it at all, because they're going through their own problem, and Ireland has always had a distinct voice in the way that the British haven't, and I'll get into that later. I would say it's political in that its preoccupation is, the way that I define it, is talking about Britain's problem through a uniquely British voice. And a lot of the subject matter has to do with British everyday life, whether it's through using lyrics that have common British vernacular, common British sayings, the over exaggeration of the regional accents throughout the vocal patterns. All of the big Brit pop bands, they have very distinct voices that you kind of can't mistake.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's hard because it's not necessarily pop, because a lot of it is rooted in rock, specifically indie rock and new wave,
Right.
and punk as well. But the pop kind of comes more from the marketing standpoint, where it was kind of the first, and some would say arguably last time, that like rock musicians from England specifically were dominating the British charts. So it was just like a bunch of British bands, 1 to 10 on the Billboard top 10,
Hmm.
and a lot of them from independent labels as well. And yeah, I think that's, without getting into the specific sound, I would say that that's what I would define it as.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's get into the specific sound a little bit as well, because when we talk about this era and the bands from this time period as having a revival moment, all of these elements of the politics and the philosophy and, the messaging and the ethos of these bands and these songs that you're talking about. And when we kind of bring that into the context of a revival, what do you feel like exactly is being revived here in this current era where, not only are Oasis coming through with this giant comeback tour, you've got bands like Suede or the London Suede who have a new record on the way. Pulp is, having a moment right now with a new record, as you say in your piece as well. What exactly is coming back? Is it the messaging from this time period that made Britpop as socially relevant as it was, or are they mostly just like kind of leaning on a memory and nostalgia that people have for a sound from a certain time period from when they were younger?
I think it's hard to say that the sound itself is coming back, because Britpop itself is a sound rooted in nostalgia. The Britpop, the ethos behind it, and what for example, in 1993, when critics consider Pop Scene, which is a single from Blur that was left out of Modern Life is Rubbish, when that came out, it's considered the first Britpop song because it uses a lot of like swinging 60s instrumentation. Like it uses the horns, it uses this kind of very like Ringo Starr-esque like drum beat, and it uses a lot of influence from the Kinks and from the Stones and from all of these great British bands from the 1960s. And that kind of going back to that sound, there are other bands like Pulp, which even though their first records, which were in the 80s, which takes on an entirely like, I would say Smith sound, but later on when they do go pop and they do incorporate some pop, it goes very glam rock, it goes very like David Bowie-esque. Right. So I think it's hard to say that the sound is coming back because it's like recycling other things from other eras, but that's kind of just music in general.
And it's so many different sounds kind of all culminating at once.
Yeah. And I do think that there are bands today that are bringing back like the horns and the regional accents and like singing in this like very loud, whiny British voice. And I would say like of the bands like Blur, like I feel like their music, especially with the punk bands of England today, is the one that I can easily most identify. Because they're like the very like boisterous, brash pop and rock go ahead. I don't know. I would say in terms of what's being revived, I think that politically we're going through a lot of the same issues. In that Britpop came after years and years of Tory power over Britain, and then suddenly towards the end is when Tony Blair comes in and he's kind of on the rise as Britpop is developing. And it's this idea of new labor. It's this idea of turning a new leaf, of kind of like taking away the austerity programs that Thatcherites and John Major, they established in Britain, and this promise of a better, more liberal Britain that ultimately doesn't really come to pass with Tony Blair because he gets them involved in the
Iraq War and everything.
Yeah, we all live in a post Tony Blair world, but and I do think that like a lot of the bands now, they grew up with like completely came of age in a Tory stronghold, because most of us came of age when it was David Cameron and then to the present, and then we had this promise of a Labour Party and like Labour returning, and then we got Keir Starmer, of which a lot of the ideologies of Labour aren't coming to fruition. So I think that there's a lot of anger. There is a lot of shakiness in terms of British pride, and a lot of British pride is shot right now. Though I wouldn't be the voice of authority on that because evidence is that I am not British.
Sure.
But yeah, I do think that in terms of a revival, I do think that people are kind of looking at these records, they're looking at these voices of the 90s, and then they're like, these are people that had a voice to talk about these problems. And they're not like an American coming over here saying everything is doom and gloom and bad. Like they're having fun with it. So I don't know. I think people want fun. People want ways to talk about their government that are creative. That's not everything is sad, and I want to not exist in this current time period. Like what a lot of American musicians were doing in the 90s that the Brits had, that the Britpop artists had a lot of problems with. So yeah, it's a whole complication of political stuff.
Well, to kind of like give people a little bit more background, because, your piece that you've written for the website is very good and it's very passionate. It's very in depth. And again, it's linked down below so people check it out. But still, like, as a younger person who didn't grow up in the thick of that era, and also on top of that, like, as somebody who is not themselves British, I'm curious as to how, like, you got so deeply ingrained into the backstory of this style and this genre. And when I, saw your piece and had heard you kind of like talking about your passion for this time period and this era of music, it reminded me of like the way, in which in college I had a stint where I was like so deeply invested in like British post-punk music from like the late 70s, early 80s, especially like a lot of the all-female bands that were coming out around the time, like the Slits and Kleenex and so on and so forth. And, just being so deeply into those bands, but also really like appreciating the social context that them and also, even a lot of second wave ska bands like the Specials, when they wrote songs like Ghost Town, for example, the sort of like eras of right-wing political control and austerity and so on and so forth that they came out with or came, sort of up in and then wrote music in response to, but obviously like I had nothing personally to do with any of that context, but just found the music to be like really interesting and intriguing. So, in the spirit of that, I just wanted to know, like, what was your introduction to a lot of these classic Britpop bands, this sound, this era? Like, what made you so interested in it in the first place? And furthermore, what does this revival that you've written about mean to you personally, with you being a fan of this, music?
Yeah, I got this question a lot because in the United States, the problem is that no one really cares about these bands as much as they do in the UK. But I will,
and some figures within are like Robbie Williams, for example, are almost completely unheard of.
yeah, which was really amusing. Like I loved that movie. It was so silly.
Yeah, his new biopic is great.
Yeah, it was so silly. I wanted to give it a standing ovation. I was so riled up. But yeah, I have a very nerdy answer in that when I was in college, I studied European history, and the kind of discipline that I was trained under was intellectual history, and I was very fascinated by the idea of the central question of what is Europe, and using this kind of lens of crafting a European identity, to like kind of understand what its problems are, to put it very bluntly, because Europe, despite how small it is, has a lot of problems. And I always loved this kind of music. I was very much into Oasis when I was in high school, because it's one of those it's one of those bands where there's not a lot going on. So when you are younger and people are telling you this is the greatest band of all time, and like they're so good, and you're just listening to these like epic guitar riffs and these like giant string arrangements, like hearing Champagne Supernova for the first time when I was 14 was like, this is what music should be. And that's crazy now. Now with everything that I know, being
Right.
being like Oasis is the best band of all time, I'm like, okay, we need to educate ourselves.
Mm.
So back to college, I studied a lot of kind of like Europe throughout time and the way that the arts and culture scene kind of creates European identities. And the UK is very fascinating because it doesn't see itself as the rest of Europe because of the divide of being an island. And
I mean, especially post-Brexit, sure.
and post-Brexit, yeah, which comes into a lot of why they kind of want a new Britpop now. In my opinion, in the way that
Yeah.
I've studied and read it, I think that Brexit really like it's kind of a turning point in the way that the end of the Troubles in the 90s was a turning point for Britain,
Mm.
because since they were forming the empire, Britain's identity has been reliant on this idea of who they're not. So a lot of stuff that I've read throughout history is like, for example, when it was the French Revolution and Britain was like, oh shit, like we don't have it written down that we need a monarchy. Like the French just got rid of their monarchy. They could do that to us. And we like had a whole civil war about it and it didn't go well, last century. So Britain, a lot of their intellectual production was like, here's who we are. We're not French. And when they colonized Ireland, they're like, okay, how are we going to incorporate Ireland? We're going to set a bunch of boundaries of what they aren't and tell them you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then they'll be British. Like you can't be Catholic, you have to be Protestant, you're British. You have to speak English, you can't speak Irish, British.
Right.
And then there's when America became a superpower, there's this whole like, well, we're not American. And even in the 90s, like Damon Albarn when he said the famous line, like, I'm gonna get rid of grunge. It was like totally anti-Nirvana, anti like American college indie rock, and stuff like that. So in the 90s, why I focus so much on Britpop is because of that political aspect of Britain, where they're on the verge of losing their first colonial acquisition, because the UK would not be as powerful as it was if it didn't have Ireland, because the UK famously rose into power with the agricultural revolution in the 1700s, and they couldn't have done any of those advances if they had not expanded their territory through violent colonization of Ireland years prior. So troubles are happening. It's an extremely tense, like tense moment, because it's the end of the troubles and it's gotten to another violent period, almost like the 1970s. And so the European Union formed, Berlin Wall fell. It's this period of like the UK is at a moment of like, we spent and all of these other countries have become countries and they've become independent from Britain. So they're at this moment of, we lost everything that we relied on to know who we are, because for as long as we existed, who we are is who we are. So now what I find interesting about this era is that it's the first time that they kind of had to like make up stuff. And they had to like make up an identity and make up this idea of the common person and what the values of the common person are. And it's all rooted in like class mentality as well, because they have this very interesting history of how classism and class politics manifest that's unique to them. And yeah, this extremely short story made long. That's what I am interested in. I'm interested in how this specific era of music kind of helped them when they were floundering and created something great and created great music out of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in your opinion, and maybe obviously with your passion for this era, you may be a bit biased. So we'll take that into account. The revivalism is happening. The nostalgia for this era is there. You have bands like Oasis that are obviously capitalizing that in the way that they are through these big festival and sort of arena performances and so on and so forth. What would you personally sort of like rate the quality of what we're hearing out of this revival as of right now? Are these like, new comeback performances from what you've observed? Are they actually good or worth people's time? Some of these newer records that are out from these bands that sort of like made their name in the Britpop scene in the 90s, are these comeback or recent albums actually decent? And do they stand up to the band's best work back in the day? Like, how are these artists aging creatively in your view with, their heyday being so relevant and hot and popular as of right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say off the bat is that I've like now with all the knowledge, Oasis is no longer my favorite. I would say that I'm a pulp girl through and through.
Fair. And the new record's pretty solid, but
I loved the new record. I think I'll talk about Pulp first, and then I'll talk about Blur, because they're the two that have made records past the heyday. And with Pulp, they've always been a band, one, that's very lyrically gifted. I think that Jarvis Cocker has the ability to write some beautiful songs. Like Something Changed is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's absolutely gorgeous. I was listening to Bar Italia, which I love. Different Class is a perfect album. But even like This Is Hardcore, like I was listening to Dishes yesterday and I'm like, this is a spectacular, like it's such a spectacular song about aging and growing up. Grown Ups on More is, or Grown Up, yeah, on More is fantastic. So I think he's a very talented lyricist. He's a very talented singer. They have such a distinct sound, and they've proven throughout their entire discography that they can do whatever, and they like evolve with time, because again, they started out as this new wave rock band that sounds very much like the Smiths, like It 1983. That's a Smiths record, in my opinion, and I think it's a really good Smiths record. But Yeah, and I think more is great. I think live Pulp is so fun. He just seems to be like Jarvis Cocker, like even now, is just such an electric presence on stage. He's always been a character. He's always had a lot of humor outside. So I think that he is someone that, in my opinion, people will always find cool. People will always like I will always find him cool. I want to ghostwrite his memoir. But so if you're hearing this, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So with Pope, they're just great. Jarvis Cocker also has his own solo stuff, but that wasn't as successful as Pope was. Blur also, I think, goes into this camp. I thought Ballad of Darren was a beautiful album. Sure, it wasn't as like riled up or electric as something like their self-titled from 1997 or even 13, which is my favorite Blur album, which gets into this kind of experimental avant-garde territory that is so beautiful and fascinating. I think Damon Albarn has the advantage that he can kind of get his energy out with Gorillaz,
Right,
which
right.
is kind of awesome to be like one of the best bands of the 90s and then be one of the best bands of the early 2000s. He has an incredible resume. And he, through that, I think also gets to do a lot of his more experimental work and then come back to basics with Blur and come back to this more rock sound that's more himself and not necessarily on collaboration with artists that maybe with Blur he wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn from and experiment with and kind of grow his own tastes. And Ballad of Darren too, I think, addressed a lot of issues that they didn't have perspective on because they were so young. Like I think that's also something that's worth mentioning is that everyone in Britpop was so young. Like they were 24, 25, and like 26 when they were at their most famous. And when you kind of put them on this pedestal as the voices of a generation, they don't have as much perspective as someone 10 years older when it comes to life. So I think getting older, doing different things, and then coming back together to make a new record with this added perspective makes them more timeless in that regard and more interesting to look at. Oasis, yeah, I'm so happy they worked out their differences.
Well, digging further into the future potential of this question, what are your thoughts on the upcoming, like, something, for example, Suede album? I know there's been like at least one teaser out from that so far. And, obviously with all of these recent, giant sold out Oasis performances that people have been seeing, there's been a lot of discussion about there being a new album at some point or some kind of new studio work or whatever. So again, one, Suede, is that anything at this point that's like, really kind of piquing your interest? And two, is new Oasis for you something that's even going to be worth it at this point, given that it's been so long? And also, taking into consideration whatever you feel like, has been the quality of like recent Noel and Liam solo records, which I mean, obviously that would probably be reflected in a new Oasis album to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the Suede album. I think it was with Suede in the timeline of Britpop, they were kind of like first one in, first one out. I think they haven't really made like a distinctly Britpop album since Dog Man Star, and that was 1994, I believe. So that was before 1995, which is I would say the peak of Britpop because that's when we had albums from pretty much everyone. So I don't know. I'm excited. Brett Anderson is a very complex and dense writer, and I'm ready to see. I really liked the new song about dancing with the Europeans. That one was a pretty good song. But yeah, I don't know. I think if I were to dive into it, I'd probably just treat it like a normal album review instead of like some kind of think piece like I would do with Blur or Pulp. And then in terms of the new Oasis album, I they can do it if they want. I don't really care. I don't think it's something that people are interested in. I think this is something that I was trying to express in my piece, or it may have been in an early draft that didn't eventually get published, of like, I think they have the most to lose if they come out with a new
Oh,
album.
absolutely, for sure.
I think that if they come out with, they're facing that like dilemma that a lot of bands that reunite and do a live tour first before doing an album are facing, which is if you, unlike Pulp, where when they reunited back in 2022, they presented new music. So I think that they got on that game early and they were like, we will be making an actual comeback. So there's less stakes for them there. Whereas,
And also the context of them sort of like taking the break that they did, it just wasn't as contentious, you
yeah,
know? So it's like,
yeah,
it's not as high stakes. Like, you know, we're getting back together. They're just going to make new music. That's cool. You know? Whereas like
yeah.
with the history of Liam and Noel, there's like a deep tension there that people are sort of like, you know, sitting on the edges of their seats, kind of waiting to turn left.
Yeah, I mean, like the funniest thing is when they announced when they were getting back together, and all of these betting sites were like, they're not even gonna make it past the UK before they beat
Right.
each other up.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and like
exactly.
$20,000 were on the line. Um, but yeah, to your point, I think that like if they come out with a new album that risks tainting the memory that a bunch of people have of them, it's going to like look at their set list. Their set list is all like definitely maybe and what's the story Morning Glory. Granted, what's the story Morning Glory? It's the 30th anniversary. I get that. But they're not doing anything from Heathen Chemistry. They're not doing anything from anything like Time Flies or no, Time Flies is the compilation album, but they're not doing the one that I'm Out of Time is on. They are doing the first two albums, which is the one everyone remembers them for and the ones that everyone pulls the most from. So if they do new music, one, betting sites are going to go up because they're like, they are notoriously horrible working with each other. They delay production time all the time in the 90s because they would just fight each other and then go get drunk at a pub. But yeah, it's a lot of bothersome risk for them if they do that, if the sound isn't good or they're trying to like do what they always do, which is like three chords and like a whine and a tambourine solo. And I'm being very reductive of Oasis right now. I'll be more fair
A
later.
little bit.
I'll be more fair later because I started out this conversation being like Champagne Supernova is one of the best
Yeah.
songs of all time.
Blew your mind.
Yes, and I don't want Liam Gallagher to shout at me. But yeah, I don't know. Short story made long, as I will say multiple times more. They have the most to lose when it comes to an album. So I'm fine if they don't. I'm fine if they just do Adidas partnerships and tour around the world multiple times, like My Chemical Romance, and call it a day.
Yeah, and you know you love it so much, and that's why you are drawn to criticize it, and
Yeah.
that's a valid angle. Getting even newer, I also wanted to ask him, and you did mention Bar Italia a minute ago, who definitely like have a pretty nostalgic sound between their latest couple of singles from their forthcoming album. You know, in terms of this like revivalism, another way in which things like this sort of come back is through the new crop of artists who come out and sort of like obviously wearing some of these classic Britpop records on their sleeve in terms of like a major influence on their new projects. You know, what artists out there that you hear today, what new bands do you feel like are kind of like embodying what you could maybe frame in some sort of way as like a Britpop sound, as diverse as that sound is? But, you know, what artists out there do you feel like creatively are riding really hard for this era and this movement in terms of like, you know, bringing back the nostalgia of that time period a little bit through their style and through their production, through their instrumentation?
Yeah, great question. And I have a lot of answers.
Hey, list them out and give people some good solid recommendations.
Yeah, so I will say the artist that when I was like 14 and growing up and getting really into Britpop, like another artist who was newer that I was like, this is also rocking my world is Declan McKenna. I think of the like indie pop artists, I think that his sound is the closest. Like you listen to Great British Bombs and it's also using those horns, it's using that like oompa that a lot of the Britpop songs use. It's using a lot of not Irish. It's using a lot of British vernacular in it and like a lot of British slang. Um, and it's so explosive and it's so fun. Whenever he performs it live, because I've seen him live multiple times, he also brings out like a giant Union Jack guitar that's very Noel Gallagher. And yeah, his first two albums, I would say, he's mellowed out a lot, but on his third record, What Happened to the Beach, but it's still like he's very political in terms of what he talks about and what he writes about. Like he's not gonna write like a love song. He's very focused on like British society and the youth culture and what British politics are doing to the youth. That I think is very interesting. Other bands in terms of sound, I think Courting, when they like released Flex, I think that is a very like neo Britpop sound. This kind of like very satirical, like I'm gonna be famous, I want to do like whatever. That's just like maximalist. I think is very like Great Escape, which is also maximalist in a way. Bar Italia, in terms of sound, they're very pulp. In terms of look as well, they're very pulpy. Um, the one guy looks like Little Jarvis Cocker. It's great. But pulp also, I feel like, has a lot of influence on American people as well. Like this deep cut from the 90s of Jonathan Fire Eater, I think Stuart Lupton was very much listening to his contemporary, rest in peace, Stuart Lupton. He was listening to Jarvis Cocker a lot in the way that he spoke, in the way that he dressed, like the suit, but also this like poor scrappy kid who's like wearing a suit all the time is very much in line with Jarvis Cocker. The Dare does that now, and he's very vocal about how much he loves pulp as well. I think the new Shame record which is coming out next week, that from what I've heard of the singles, that is also very much in line with this idea of satire and like blaring guitars, blaring drums, everything full force, and just doing that. But yeah, I would veer on the side of caution of nostalgia. I think it's just like sonic influence because I don't think any of those artists are like, we need to go back. That times were better there. Because I think that is the main mistake of what some journalists call nostalgia now versus what the artists are doing. I think a lot of journalists are like, we need to go back because times were happier, of which I would also disagree with. But yeah, I would say sonically, I think that spirit of just being funny, being fun, having fun while also addressing a lot of these issues is something that a lot of British artists these days are doing that I find really, really interesting.
So, you're saying from your own perspective as a younger person who's sort of into this revival and into this era of music, that you're not looking to just like kind of relive the past, but you're like actively observing the social commentaries that were being made by these albums and these artists. And you're like, actually, we need to use this and kind of get back into this idea and use that to move forward as opposed to go backwards.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that Britpop gets a really bad rep from people nowadays. I feel like it's uncool to be like, I love Britpop, because there are these journalists that are still working and still making money and still like the way that Oasis is being written right now irks me because it is people being like, oh, the Brits are happy again. Like everyone is so happy now that Oasis is back. And I'm like, sure, yes, like it's a fun concert. I think the reason why they became the most popular out of everyone in Britpop is because they had the most appeal in their sound and they had these very like broad sweeping lyrics that people could connect to because no one's going to disagree with I Need to Be Myself in Supersonic, and no one's going to disagree with Live Forever. No one's going to disagree with their faux Beatles cosplay in Champagne Supernova. And that kind of like spirit of just like, I finally feel joy again because Oasis is back. I roll my eyes at because I'm like, I feel like you're missing the point. I feel like a lot of people who are like Britpop sucked because it was just so like complacent with the British government and it was so in the pockets of the British government. I'm like, you didn't listen to Blur. You did not listen to their discography front to back. You did not see what they were doing and you did not understand the nuances of, for example, Pulp. And the reason why Different Class won the Mercury Prize that year is because it is such a concise, fun, but also scathing and sad at times, and also beautiful analysis of class politics. Like, like they're from the North, they're not from London. I think Jarvis Cocker, like in the beginning of his career, like squatted in an apartment and like only owned like one suit, or that's part of the mythology that he built around himself. But being these like not necessarily like upper class people and being from these people from different parts of the UK and independent artists as well, and noticing the class issues and noticing all of the problems that they're facing these days, I think is core to the ethos of Britpop. And that's what makes it interesting and that's what makes it appealing, is because there were bands that were appealing to people, but not in the like hit a nail on the head way that Oasis was. It was actually like making people think and making people like understand and like give people role models. I mean, they weren't the best role models, but giving people role models to just kind of be like, yeah, I think it's the same excitement that I felt when English Teacher won the Mercury Prize. And when they won the Mercury Prize and they were like, we depended on the grants, we depended on independent music. And English Teacher, highly recommend that band as well.
Yeah, they're a good band. I've reviewed them myself. They're a cool band.
Yeah. So I think it's that is what people in the 90s may have felt with most of the bands. And that's what I feel when I listen to the Britpop bands. It's that kind of excitement of these independent musicians who aren't from the capital, they aren't from upper class backgrounds, making good music and finally having good music on the top of the charts. And like, that's the music that everyone's listening to, not like now where the top of the charts is a foreign language to me. But yeah.
And also, you know, maybe in a respect, and there's been a lot of think pieces on this that I've been seeing, but you know, it's reflective of some kind of like an effective, broadly enjoyed mainstream and monoculture, like, whereas today just everything feels, even the most popular things that like, you know, people talk about in the world of music at the top of the charts, be it Drake, be it Taylor Swift, like a lot of that, despite it doing so well commercially, a lot of the time just feels so niche. You know, like just feels so painfully niche, and like you have to have been paying attention to the last 6 seasons of, you know, that artist's catalog to like actually kind of get anything out of what they're doing now. And their commercial success is reflected less by broad enjoyment of everything that they're doing and more by their most hardcore fans just incessantly playing their music over and over and over and over and over endlessly, because, you know, that's just how music is successful in the streaming paradigm today.
Yeah, I don't know. I do have to agree. I think I do have to agree with that, because I wouldn't say like with British rock, I'm still very tapped into what's coming out of Britain right now. And yeah, I would agree that even though I think that there is a very interesting sound that is coming out, that like even if the bands are not from the same city or they're not playing at the same like venues, I think that there is a lot of sonic overlap and they're all in communication with each other, where I don't really get that in the United States as much. Even in my own city of New York, like there's a lot of New York bands right now that are coming up that I'm like, none of you would ever play in the same bar, or maybe they would. I don't know. We're a very interesting city with a very complex musical history that I adore and could talk about in a different video.
Oh yeah, I mean it's probably another conversation.
Yeah, but I think like for example, like the scene that I'm following right now and that I'm also really obsessed with is like the scene that's coming out from the Brixton Windmill and all of those bands.
We're all obsessed with the windmill scene right now.
I love them.
And we'll probably do a conversation about that too at some point.
Yes.
At some with you or another writer or someone, because it is getting more interesting every year.
Yeah, but it's like that's what I'm talking about, is that like within that scene, not everyone there is from London. I think that like the main ones, yes. But like, for example, like the new band or the Orchestra for Now that always plays there, they're from Cambridge. They're not from London. There's West Side Cowboy, which is coming out. They just came out with their EP that I covered. And they're from Manchester. And they're doing a really interesting thing with combining British rock and this kind of like post-punk sound with American folk music, which I think is really interesting. But they all seem in dialogue with each other, and they all seem like they're doing this sound. They have similar writing styles, which is admittedly fucking crazy writing styles, which I adore. I think we should be more surreal in the way that we talk about the world. But yeah, I would say that, to your point, even that is not what's dominating Britain right now. There's also the whole electronic scene of like the PC music label. And
right. And everything that's branched off of that.
Yeah, and like AG
Brat Summer and all of it.
Yeah, and like A.G. Cook also has an album called Britpop.
Which I mean, quick thoughts on reappropriating that term for such a sound, for such a song?
I think it's cool. I understand that it's so different from everything else, but what I appreciate about it is that he was kind of in the same mentality that Damon Albarn was when he came back from Modern Life is Rubbish, because he was also in America and he was like, these people don't get it. I feel so far away from what I know. I'm going to write a British album. And then he wrote Park Life, as the story goes. What I liked about the term itself, one, it's actually pop in that like most of Britpop is arguably more rock than pop if we're going to get into the niche of genres.
That's true.
But two, I think it made me think of like, is there a new music scene in Britain that's emerging that is distinct? And I do think like their electronic music scene is its own thing. It doesn't, even though there is a lot of cross collaboration with Americans and with French and with a bunch of other people throughout the Western world, I do think that there is something unique about that scene that I would be interested in exploring more. But yeah, I like it. I thought it was smart. I thought it captured the ethos of Britpop without evoking nostalgia, which I appreciate.
Victoria, I want to thank you for taking the time and just sort of going over this revival, going over the Britpop hits, the biggest and best albums and bands, and just cluing us into where all this is coming from and where it's going.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me talk about my freaky little interests.
I recommend everybody listening and watching check out Victoria's piece linked in the D box. And again, thank you for coming through.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And there you have it. Again, check out Victoria's piece via the D box down below. It's linked right there. And over here is another video that you can check out next to my head. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Britpop, forever.